please welcome the mayor of Stockton, California, Michael Tubbs.
Wow. I'm ready to carry something in Stockton for Saru. And thank you, Saru, Manira, and you all. I think it's an honor to be here because I understand that oftentimes the people on the microphone, that's where people think power resides. But we all know here at Netroots that power resides in the clipboards, and the tennis shoes, and the bullhorns, and the work you all do. So I want to start by thanking you all for your tireless efforts and know that your labor is not in vain. And please, like my grandmother always says, don't get weary in well-doing, for in due season, we'll reap a harvest if we faint not. I'm happy to be here today. My name is Michael Tubbs, and I'm the mayor, not the intern, I'm the mayor of the great city of Stockton, California. And I'm here, okay, Stockton. And I'm here today because the issues we fight for, the things we talk about, aren't just theoretical. They're personal for us. It's personal for the young person in Flint, Michigan, whose brain development might be impaired because of the water he or she has to drink. It's personal for the mother who just addressed our Congress, whose baby died in our immigration custody. It's personal for the young people right now as we speak, held in detention centers and camps, who are going through unspoken trauma and horror on our shores. It's personal for the young person growing up in poverty, as Manira said, in West Philly. It's personal for the workers we talked about, who are working for zero wages and living off tips. The work we do is so important because it's personal for us, and it's also personal for me. Before I was mayor, I was a young, poor black kid in the south side of Stockton, California. My mother, she was a teenager when I was born. She was a senior in high school. And my father has been incarcerated the last 28 years, so my entire life. Growing up in Stockton, in neighborhoods with high poverty and low opportunity, neighborhoods that were high in everything bad and low in everything good, I believed in this myth of exceptionalism. I thought if I pulled myself up by my bootstraps, if I worked hard, if I studied, I would be okay. And I was lucky enough to get a full scholarship to Stanford. I was lucky enough to intern, but then when I was an intern in the White House, the other White House, I received a call from my mother that changed the trajectory of my path. My mother called me in November 2010, and she told me that my first cousin had been a victim of a homicide. He had been murdered in Stockton, California. And in that moment, I was faced with a choice. And the choice was one of whether apathy or action, whether to stay angry, stay upset, be nihilistic, or to do something about it. So it's the midst of that pain of thinking of, well, maybe it's not enough for me to be successful. Maybe there are structural issues that lead to different outcomes. Maybe people can't pull themselves up by their bootstraps if they don't have boots or shoelaces or a floor. That caused me to run for city council in Stockton in 2012 as a 21-year-old college senior. And I was lucky enough to win. And then I won again in 2016 to run for mayor. And now we're really in Stockton figuring out what does a progressive vision for 2020 look like. And I think that conversation, particularly for us here at Netroots, is so important because if you see what I see, I think we have to first start by understanding that what we're seeing is nothing new. 2020 vision, a progressive vision for 2020, has to start with the fact that this is not the first time a white supremacist or a misogynist has been in the White House. A progressive vision for 2020 has to literally see and name that this is not the first time we have had racist immigration policies. A progressive vision for 2020 has to name and understand this is not the first time we've had massive wealth inequality. A progressive vision for 2020 has to name and understand what we're experiencing is not about a person in the White House. It's about an ideology of white supremacy in the system. And it's going to take real policy work and a policy agenda and understand it's bigger than a person to get us to where we need to be. And forgive me, I'm 29 years old, and I really struggle with the fact that in 2019, we're still having conversations like sexual harassment is bad. I struggle with the fact that in 2019, we're still having discussions about whether climate change is happening. I struggle with the fact that in 2019, we're still fighting and answering the same questions that we had from the foundation of this union. But I'm excited to be here with you all because I also understand that this may be not the first time we're facing these issues, but I think together, united with clarity, this will be the last. I don't want to have a conversation in 2024 or 2028 about a living wage for all people. I don't want to have a conversation in 2024 or 2028 about the need to address the existential threat to our species of climate change. I don't want to have a conversation in 2024 or 2028 that all people, men, women, trans folks are truly created equal. And our policies should reflect that. So in Stockton, what we're doing things like making sure that every single student who graduates from our largest school district is guaranteed access to higher education through a place-based scholarship for a 2-year school or trade school or a 4-year college. We're saying in Stockton that even the folks who are perpetrators of violent crime deserve the same attention from resources and opportunities and cognitive behavioral therapy as they get from cops. We're saying in Stockton that our 2020 vision is one that understands that folks need an economic floor, and that's why we're piloting a basic income. And the conversation has been one of dignity, and not dignity attached to what I can produce, but dignity attached to my humanity. As people, we're inherently dignified. And as we heard from Saru, folks are working. The issues aren't that folks don't have jobs. The issues that folks aren't making wages to keep up with rent. I have conversations every single day with folks who are working 2 or 3 jobs, driving your Ubers, delivering your food through Uber Eats, who still can't pay bills. And I think a progressive vision for 2020 has to say enough is enough. I think Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And we're not talking about anything radical. We're not talking about anything crazy. We're talking about what we all deserve as human beings. And I think Netroots Nation, we have to literally put our stake in the ground and say we're happy to have this fight in 2020, but we're not fighting for dignity for all people afterward. That's a given. We're happy to have this fight in this election, but after this election, white supremacy in this country is done. We're happy to have this fight in 2020, but thereafter, we have to hold these truths to really be self-evident, and as Dr. King said, have America be true to what it said on paper. So as I close, there was an activist I had the pleasure of meeting 10 years ago. His name was Bob Singleton. He was a freedom writer, and we were reenacting the freedom rights. And he looked at me when we were in Anniston, Alabama, and he said, Michael, I was arrested on August 4th, 1961. Why is that day important? And I said, well, sir, you were arrested. If you weren't arrested, I wouldn't be on this bus. I wouldn't have the privileges I had. And he said, on that day, Barack Hussein Obama was born. And then he said he had no idea, as an activist, as an organizer, that the choice he made on that day would pave the way so a child born 50 years later will have the chance to be president. And then he looked at me and he said, what are you prepared to do today so that 50 years later, a child is born with more opportunity? And Netroots Nation, that is the question before us today, tomorrow, and in 2020. It's easy to be angry. It's easy to be upset. It's easy to blame everything on a person or a figure. But I think the question before us today is, what are we prepared to do with our works, with our policies, with our votes, so that a child born today, 50 years later, aren't fighting the same fights we're fighting? What are we prepared to do today so a child born today can look back at us with pride and honor and say they stood for something and they fought? What are we prepared to do today so that 50 years later, a child is born in a country that's not still arguing about whether we should have affordable housing? So a child is born in a country that's not still arguing about whether everybody, meaning everybody, meaning people who look like me, people who don't, have inherent dignity and equality. What are we prepared to do today so that 50 years later, a child born today in poverty in West Philly, or in poverty in Stockton, or drinking the water in Flint has a chance to be president? If we answer that question the way I know we will, with works and not words, then the conversation we have, not in 2020, but in 2024 and 2028, will be radically different. So as I prepare to close, I say this. I say thank you for not what you've done, but what we will do. And I'll also say that again, in 2020, it's our chance to put a stake in the ground. It's our chance to say, you know what, we're happy to fight these fights because they're worthy fights, but it's our chance to say it's not the first time this has happened in our country, but it will be the last. It's our chance to say that we're happy to organize and mobilize and fight, but we understand the meaning of neighbors transcends economic anxiety and xenophobia, and that we don't want to be facing the same fights in 2024 and 2028. Thank you.